reviewed more shonen.
I'm sorry! They're just so long!
Not as long as your recovery time's gonna be.
Alright, I'll review one!
Not good enough.
3! I'll review 3! At once!
Alright, have fun with filming.
So let's get some cartoons and vodka and do them all night long. Are you ready for some fun? Drink 'em down, drink 'em down, drink 'em down. Drink 'em down, drink 'em down, drink 'em down. Oh.
But Pluto, if one shonen is too long, how does combining them make the review easier? Because I can't get dragged into the nitty-gritty of characters or arcs even if I wanted to. Which I don't. Instead, I'm going to focus on how these mangas fit into the standard battle shonen mold and how they distinguish themselves. Today we're going to look at Psyren, 666 Satan, and MAR. Psyren does some very clever things with time travel and has an excellent battle system. 666 Satan is extremely trope-laden, but is noteworthy for actually committing to the friendship will save the world thing most shonens do out of habit. MAR, or Martian Awakens Romance, is similarly trope-laden, but is so committed to just being a shonen that it comes back around to just being a fascinating send-up of the genre. So we're going to break this down into chunks covering each manga. We'll start with world building, then move on to the all-important battle system, and then finally into some subheadings about story structure. First up is 666 Satan, which takes place in a very generic, vaguely fantasy world. This is the kind of thing that Dragon Ball did and is pretty easy to copy. Just draw a bunch of vaguely alien-like landscapes, slap a bunch of scrap on the towns, and you got a brand new, if familiar, world. 666 Satan also draws a lot of visual influence from the Kabbalah. Kabbalah is very poorly described as Judaism on hard mode. I'm not an expert, won't pretend to be. If you'd like a proper introduction, I recommend Kyle Calgreen's video on Revolver. But you may recognize the Kabbalah tree, which just keeps showing up in anime. It's almost always used for its pleasing visual design and rarely, if ever, has anything to do with the story. Or did you think Evangelion was actually about angels? 666 Satan also likes to bandy about the number of the beast, and angels and demons, and it's got a whole village of people rocking the third eye thing. All these loaded symbols are basically set dressing, and that's fine. It's fine. Now, Psyren is going for a very different world conception since it's a time travel story. The present day is assumed to be basically Japan, and the future is a dark blasted hellscape where monsters devour the few human survivors. It's revealed that there are secret government facilities doing psychic powers research in the present, but they're secret, so it doesn't break the illusion of the normal world being invaded by weird bird mask aliens from the future. Psyren mostly stands out for its battle system, but I do want to talk about how it handles time travel. Okay, so what's happening to the characters is that they're being pulled from the present into the future. But the time wizard who's doing that is in the future. So from their perspective, they're pulling in people from the past to their present in the hopes that those people learning things will change that present. And every time they go back, without fixing the central destructive incident that fallout in the world, it creates a parallel timeline without actually affecting the presence of the time wizard. And they do that several times without fixing that problem until they actually do fix it, no boom, and then they don't get pulled into the future anymore, handily bypassing the predestination paradox. God, I am such a nerd. So that's Psyren. Let's move on to Martian Awakens Romance, which takes a completely different tack by going full fairy tale. And I mean full fairy tale. More tales than a Catgirl convention, and certainly more tales than the actual fairy tale. Ginta gets sucked into a fantasy world and immediately meets a witch named Dorothy who has a giant dog named Toto. His friend is a guy named Jack who is a farmer that wants to grow a giant beanstalk. The enemies he fights base their power structure on chess pieces, and at one point Ginta summons mother-flippin' Puss in Boots to do battle. I checked the dates, and yeah, this manga probably stole the idea from Shrek 2. While the eclectic reference pool can definitely make the world feel a bit inconsistent, it also invokes a very pleasant sense of how much fun the mangaka is having slamming all these cool toys together. That sense of childish wonder is heavily reflected in the title and the main character, and no matter how dark the manga gets, it never goes full edgelord. And it does get violent, because this is a shonen action manga, and that means someone's gonna get their ass beat. An often overlooked element of setting up a good shonen is creating a solid foundation for the fights. Everyone's eventually going to start punching, so it's important that those punch-ups have room for satisfying tactics and power growth. The Naruto Neji fight is iconic because in terms of strength and training, Naruto should have got his ass beat, but pulled out a win with cleverness and tactics. Conversely, later seasons of DBZ really start to feel like the winner is whoever can shoot the bigger explosion. Psyren works off the premise that everyone has latent psychic powers, and the atmosphere in the future gives them a boost. Psychic powers come in three main flavors: body enhancers, direct physical attacks, and mental abilities. And within those categories, there's a lot of personalized styles: pyromancy, freezing attacks, teleportation, matter phasing. One of the late game bosses has such intense psychic powers that he can refocus sunlight into a deadly laser! Our main hero, Ageha, has an unusual psychic projection named Melch's Door, which manifests as a giant black orb that flies around trying to devour any psychic energy. It's a pain to control, but eventually he turns it into a bunch of interesting things, like long-range sniping, shields, and even a barrier against poison gas. It's a clever way of giving Ageha room to level up his skills by creating new techniques without having to resort to constant and distracting power boosts. Ahem, Bleach. 666 Satan goes for a more restrictive, ancient weapons only a few people can wield thing. This works well in the beginning since our hero has what is known as an O part that isn't particularly impressive, it's just a magic boomerang. And I'm not knocking such a classic Zelda staple, but it's not the kind of weapon you pull out during the Ganon fight. But it's fine for a starter weapon since it's basically all the kid could find. The O parts range from magic weapons to full-on mechs, somewhat like an Eva. This isn't great for any sort of reasonable power curve, and most O part users end up relying on the power of their weapon with little in the way of tactics or skill. Major exception being this guy whose weapons are fairly basic elemental rings that he supercharges by combining them in clever ways. Eventually, the manga introduces new sources of powers like angels and magic third eyes, which works fine since they are actually tied into the plot. MAR does a similar thing, except basically anyone can use magic tools, and it is based a lot more on your internal spirit power. Two main types are weapon arms and summoning arms that summon giant magical creatures. What's interesting about this spirit power is how limited it is. Big summons draw a lot of power, so you get a lot of fights where both parties are intentionally holding back on using their trump card because they want to wait for when they know it's gonna work. It's a tension you don't see a lot where the big moves are dangerous to just pull out because if it doesn't work, you're boned. MAR also raises the eternal chicken and egg question of which came first, the weapon or the gimmick? Did Mr. Treonhead adopt the plant gimmick before or after he got a bunch of plant-based weapons? Was he just looking at his collected weapons one day and realized he had a theme going and might as well roll with it? Or did he start out with the tree fro and creeped out all the other evil minions when he kept requesting the plant weapons? Don't talk to Keebler elves, he's creepy!
Spirit gun!
Crystal, I'm not reviewing Yu Yu Hakusho.
Why the fuck not?
'Cause it's too important to cover in a triple review.
Oh, fair enough. See you later then.
Whatever, but that leads us nicely into talking about...
Our players are fast and strong and brave and your guys, not so much.
Yes, the dreaded momentum-killing tournament arc. Most battle shonens resort to this easy way of having your characters fight, and while it certainly has its issues, it does provide some benefits. They can provide a lighter tone if you need a pace break, they're a place where teammates can find out who's stronger without having to angst it up, and most obviously they give the mangaka plenty of new characters and powers to introduce. Not that much of this applies to today's mangas. Psyren doesn't have a tournament arc at all. I guess it didn't fit in the time travel narrative. 666 Satan has a very typical tournament arc. The crew finds out about a tournament where you can win cool stuff and travel up to a floating island run by a crazy despot. Old enemies are there, new friends are made, and it's mostly free of contrived drama. Satan also uses the end of the tournament as its turning point where friends are lost and the status quo is permanently shifted.
The all is lost moment!
It also has one of those wacky, hilarious commentators who's a gay, cross-dressing stereotype. Moving on! In comparison, MAR is like half tournament arc. After getting the gang together, the chess group attacks and sets up a winner takes the planet tournament where the few good guy reps battle progressively stronger enemies. This blatantly video gamey setup is actually something the chess group already ran about 10 years ago, so the stupidity is balanced out by the fact that this is just how the villains roll. They like to play with their food. The tournament structure also gives Ginta lots of time for... Basically, every battle manga needs to take a break every now and then to do some leveling up for its characters. It's a reality of the format where stakes have to keep being raised without the benefit of long gaps of time between adventures. MAR pulls a fast one by having this one guy have a way of creating training spaces that exist on a different timescale so Ginta and crew can squeeze days of training in between the matches. It's about as blatant as the chess hosting a literal world domination tournament, again making MAR just one of the most shonen things to ever shonen. Psyren has the crew training in between trips to the future, most memorably with Ageha palling around with psychic orphans for a week, cause literal children are at his mental level. Psyren does have to play the "here's a super move you've never heard of" bullshit Bleach was so fond of for the final battle, which is a bit of a knock, but the manga was almost over by that point. 666 Satan has its own version of training with Master Roshi, which was alright. It also pulls the old trick of combining the training with a... Yes, the time skip, a way of aging up characters, bypassing a bunch of training, and jiggering around the status quo. It's a decent way for a shonen manga to skip past the dry but necessary battle training of characters and get to the parts we're actually here for. So those are some of the tropes of shonen action mangas. I didn't make this video to tear down these cliches or make fun of the mangas for using them. I'm not cinema sins here, okay? No. These mangas are all fine examples of their craft. I'd say my favorite of the three is probably Psyren. I just wanted to point out how using these formulaic elements isn't necessarily a bad thing. They became cliches for a reason, and they can be used well or poorly. So the next time you're reading an action manga and thinking to yourself, this character dynamic really reminds me of Naruto and Sasuke, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe I'd like to read a manga where those characters are done except better. Man, I am just calling them out today!